Have you ever stopped to think about who really holds the power inside a courtroom? Well, India's new Sanhita justice system lays out a super specific blueprint for that power. It defines exactly who gets to prosecute a case, and just as importantly, how much power a judge has to hand down a sentence. So today, we're going to tear open that blueprint and see exactly who's in charge. Let's dive in. So, who really runs the courtroom? The easy answer is just the judge, right? But under this new framework, it's way more structured than that. There's a clear chain of command for the lawyers making the arguments and for the courts hearing the case. Think of it like a really complex machine. And today, we're basically looking at the instruction manual. All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll meet the two main players on the field. Then, we'll zoom in on the state's prosecutors and their whole chain of command. After that, we're going to flip over to the courts to figure out the limits of a judge's power. And finally, we'll connect all the dots and see why this whole structure matters so much. Every courtroom drama, every legal thriller, it always has two sides. In this system, that means the prosecutors, those are the lawyers arguing for the state, and then you have the courts, where the judges make the final call. So let's start by getting to know the prosecution. So who exactly are these lawyers fighting for the state? Well, it turns out not all prosecutors are created equal. The Sanhita actually sets up a few different roles, and they're based on responsibility and, maybe most importantly, on years of experience. First up, you've got the public prosecutor, or the PP. Now, these are the seasoned lawyers. They're appointed to handle the big cases in the higher-level courts. We're talking high courts and district courts. And here's the key detail. You need at least 7 years of practice as an advocate just to be in the running for this job. Okay, next we have the assistant public prosecutor. Their turf is the courts of magistrates, which handle a massive volume of cases. Now, what's really interesting here is that, fine print, a police officer who worked on the investigation of a case is not allowed to be the prosecutor for that same case. And that's a huge deal, right? It's a critical rule designed to prevent any conflict of interest. And then you have the specialist, the special public prosecutor. When a case is super complex or really high profile, the government can bring in an expert. And just look at that experience bar. It's even higher. We're talking a minimum of 10 years of practice. That tells you that these prosecutors are reserved for the absolute toughest legal battles. And this chart just lays it all out perfectly, doesn't it? You can see the whole hierarchy at a glance. You've got your public prosecutors in the major courts needing 7 years of experience, the special prosecutors for those unique cases needing a full decade of practice, and then the assistant PPs handling things in the magistrate courts. It's a system that's really built on experience and specialization. Okay, but with all these different prosecutor roles, you have to wonder, who's in charge? Who's the boss? How do you make sure everyone's on the same page? That's where a new central command structure comes into play, the Directorate of Prosecution. So the Directorate creates this really clear top-down chain of command. At the very top, you have the Director of Prosecution. Reporting to the director are the deputy directors, and then under them, you have the assistant directors. Pretty much every prosecutor in the state system fits into this hierarchy, which makes sure that everybody reports to somebody. And this isn't just about a corporate-style org chart, it's about focus. The leadership team actually divides up their oversight based on how severe the potential punishment is. The director personally keeps an eye on the most serious cases, anything facing 10 years or more, life in prison, or even the death penalty. Deputies handle that next tier, the 7 to 10 year range, and the assistants oversee all the cases with punishments under 7 years. It's a very deliberate, tiered system of supervision. Okay, so we've pretty much mapped out the prosecution side of things. Now, let's switch gears and pivot to the other side of the courtroom. Where do these cases actually get heard and decided? To get that, we need to understand the hierarchy of the courts themselves. This right here is basically the ladder of the criminal court system. At the very top, you have the High Court, which is the highest court in the state. Just below that, you've got the courts of session, which handle the really serious criminal cases. And then you have the workhorses of the system, the different magistrate courts that handle the bulk of the day-to-day stuff. And as we're about to see, each rung on this ladder has very, very different powers. And that brings us to what might be the most critical question of all. How much power to punish does a judge at each of these levels actually have? The Samhita is incredibly specific about this. It sets crystal clear limits on the sentences each type of court is allowed to impose. At the very top of that pyramid, the power is, immense. High courts and sessions courts can legally hand down any sentence that the law allows, all the way up to life imprisonment and even the death penalty. But, and this is a really big but, there's a vital check and balance here. Any death sentence that comes from a sessions judge has to be confirmed by the High Court. Now let's step down one level to the Chief Judicial Magistrate. Their power is pretty significant, but it hits a hard ceiling. And as you can see, that ceiling is 7 years. This isn't just some random number. It's a critical line in the sand. It means any crime that could possibly result in more than 7 years has to be heard by a higher court, like a sessions court. And this table just lays out that descending scale of power perfectly. Below the Chief Judicial Magistrate, a first-class magistrate can sentence someone to a max of 3 years in prison and hit them with a fine up to 50,000 rupees. Go down one more step, and a second-class magistrate's power is capped at just 1 year and a 10,000 rupee fine. The limits are incredibly precise and clear. So we've walked through the hierarchies for prosecutors and for the courts. We've looked at experience requirements and sentencing limits. But what's the big picture here? Why go to all this trouble to create such a detailed and honestly rigid blueprint for justice? So why all these rules and layers? Well, it really all boils down to 3 big ideas: order, consistency, and accountability. This structure is designed to make sure everyone reports to someone, that a judge in one district has the same basic power as a judge in another, and that the most serious crimes get the most high-level attention. It's really all about making the justice system predictable. And this whole philosophy of organized management, it's not just a concept, it's baked right into the law. This quote here shows that at every level, there's a mechanism for a superior to organize the work of the people below them. It is all about creating a well-managed, predictable, and orderly system for how justice gets done. And that really brings us to our final thought for today. A system built on clear rules, strict hierarchies, and defined limits, it's engineered for consistency and for efficiency. It's a machine designed to produce predictable results. But it leaves us with a really critical question to think about. Does a perfectly consistent system always deliver true justice? We'll leave you with that.